In this lesson, we're going to be talking about encryption over wireless networks. When 802.11 was first published, a portion of that included a section for Wired Equivalent Privacy, or WEP, sometimes called WEP. WEP was a way of getting privacy and encryption into this over-the-air transmission medium. And people figured that because we're doing transmission over the air, we don't have any control over where it goes, unlike with a wired network where the wires are only going to go where I put the wires or where somebody puts the wires who has access to the network infrastructure. In the case of radio transmissions, they go absolutely everywhere within a certain range, and if you're within that range, you can pick up these radio signals. So as a result, people decided that we needed some ability to have some privacy so that anybody who could hear those radio signals wouldn't necessarily be able to jump on and hear our transmissions. As a result, we ended up with WEP. WEP was kind of a weak protocol. It used 10 or 26 hexadecimal digits for a password. It also uses a stream cipher, and the stream cipher that it uses is RC4. Now, there's a couple of different ways of doing authentication. You could do open system, or you could use shared key. With a shared key, it's basically you've got a password and you use that password to authenticate. And as a result, you get the encryption that results from there. There was a vulnerability in the initialization vector of the algorithm, though. It was small, it was weak, and as a result, WEP can actually be cracked after gathering enough data. Now, I've got here in my Mac OS, I've got my system preferences up with the network, and you can see I've got my Wi-Fi. It happens to be connected to this particular network. I could have it join another network, and I could either do no security, which is the open system. I could do WEP. I could do WPA personal or WPA2, or I could do one of these enterprise ones as well. So here's the different types of security that I have available. And even though this is on the Mac, you can do the same thing under Windows. If you bring up your network connections, you can start doing different types of connections over wireless, and you can have the same support for WEP or WPA or WPA2. Now, while I'm talking about WPA, let me tell you what WPA is. It's actually a Wi-Fi protected access, and the original WPA was actually an intermediate measure because they knew there were problems with WEP, and they were eventually going to move on to something else. And the thing that they were going to move on to was a better, stronger version, and that was called WPA2. WPA and WPA2 can use a pre-shared key, and that would be for WPA personal and WPA2 personal. That would use a pre-shared key. And the thing about the pre-shared key, it could be a passphrase of variable length, and you weren't restricted to either 10 or 26 digits for your password. You could have however many number of digits or characters that you wanted to in your pre-shared key or your passphrase. In addition to the personal, we have the ability to do enterprise. And let me show you this enterprise here. There's actually a mode called automatic, or we could do EAP TLS. And EAP is extensible authentication protocol, and TLS is transport layer security. So we could use EAP TLS to do our authentication for us. And in this case, it's actually asking for a username and password. So with enterprise encryption for Wi-Fi, you authenticate with a username and password, and there's typically a Radius server on the back end that supports doing the actual authentication with the username and password for you. So that's on the end where the access point is. If I were to go to WPA2 personal, you can see it's just asking me for my password. So the thing that the enterprise components bring is the ability to have individuals log in, and that gives us the ability to have some accountability. So if I connect to a network, I'm going to pass my username and password, and if I get logged in, that will get logged somewhere. And people will know by looking at the logs when I was connected to a particular wireless network. So from an enterprise perspective, having that auditability and accountability is a really good thing, because you know who's been using wireless and who hasn't. And if something happens, you can make a determination as to who was using wireless at any given point, theoretically. So that's WEP and WPA, WPA2, personal and enterprise. That's how you would do the authentication. Now, depending on the implementation of Wi-Fi, there's a Wi-Fi protected setup, and that allows WPA, WPA2 to be broken. If you don't have Wi-Fi protected setup implemented, you're not actually vulnerable. But if you do have Wi-Fi protected setup, there were some vulnerabilities in it that allows WPA and WPA2 to be broken. So even though WPA and WPA2 are newer protocols and they are generally better than WEP, they are not invulnerable themselves. So there have been vulnerabilities in even the newer wireless encryption and wireless privacy protocols. And that's the different ways of doing wireless encryption and having some encryption and some privacy on your Wi-Fi network.